We remember World War II through images of fire and steel. Tanks grinding across Europe, bombers blotting out the sun, soldiers storming beaches under fire. But behind the smoke of battle was a quieter force, one without uniforms, without armies, without flags. Because behind every bomb, every tank and every soldier was a banker. Wars are not only fought, they are financed. And those who controlled the money didn't just survive the chaos, they profited from it. The cost of World War II was staggering. Trillions in today's dollars were spent on weapons, supplies and logistics. No nation, not Germany, not Britain, not even the United States, could shoulder it alone. They needed loans, credits, and banks willing to move money in the shadows, and that's where the story twists. American and British banks that once financed Europe after World War I found themselves entangled with the regimes tearing it apart again. Swiss vaults filled with Nazi gold, some stripped from occupied nations, some from victims of the Holocaust. Global corporations signed deals that ensured profit no matter who won. When the war ended, the same networks that fueled destruction turned around and profited again from Reconstruction. World War II was remembered as a victory of democracy over fascism, freedom over tyranny, and it was. But beneath the glory lay another truth. It was also a triumph of finance. This is the story of the banks and deals that financed and funded World War II. War devours money before it ever claims lives. A single Spitfire fighter cost the British government what would be nearly $200,000 today. A battleship swallowed millions. Bombers consumed steel, fuel, and labor by the ton, only to be destroyed in a matter of weeks. Multiply that across 6 years of global conflict and the scale becomes almost unimaginable. By 1945, World War II had cost the equivalent of over $4 trillion in today's dollars, the most expensive war in history. And it wasn't just weapons, feeding armies, transporting millions of soldiers, supplying fuel, building new factories, paying wages. The bills grew faster than any treasury could keep up with. Both sides faced the same problem. Germany had spent the 1930s rearming, pouring money into steel, aircraft and weapons, but reinforcement didn't pay for itself. It relied on loans, secret trade, and foreign banks willing to keep the Reich's economy afloat. Britain, meanwhile, was already weighed down by debts from the First World War. Its empire was vast, but its gold reserves were thin. Within a year of fighting, London was already desperate for credit. Even the United States, with its immense industrial base, needed financial maneuvers with war bonds, new taxes, and Wall Street's capital networks to transform itself into the arsenal of democracy. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. No nation could finance World War II alone. They all turned to bankers, corporations, and intermediaries, some operating in daylight, others in shadows. And not all of them chose sides with the same conviction as the soldiers on the front lines. So the question isn't how was World War II fought, it's who paid for it, and who, when the war was over, walked away richer than before. The Second World War didn't begin on the battlefield. Its financial roots go back to the 1920s. Germany, crushed under the Treaty of Versailles, faced impossible reparations. Hyperinflation in 1923 turned life savings into worthless paper. On paper, the German economy was finished. But then came the loans. In 1924, Wall Street bankers, led by J.P. Morgan, engineered the Dawes Plan. It poured billions of dollars into Germany to stabilize its currency and restart its industries. 5 years later, the Young Plan restructured reparations again and opened the floodgates for even more credit. The result was stunning. German factories roared back, steel production climbed, railways expanded, chemical giants like IG Farben flourished, financed in no small part by American and British capital. What looked like generosity was also good business. Wall Street earned interest and German recovery created new markets. But that recovery came with a hidden cost. By the early 1930s, as the Nazis rose to power, many of these financial ties didn't vanish. They adapted. Ford operated plants in Cologne. General Motors, through its Opel subsidiary, became one of Germany's biggest vehicle producers. IBM supplied punch card systems that helped the regime catalog census data, later used to track minorities and political opponents with chilling efficiency. British business interests also remained. Vickers, Rolls-Royce and others sold machinery and parts in the years before the war, often justifying it as simple commerce. Even as Hitler's rhetoric grew more aggressive, business carried on. For bankers and executives, Germany was a client. Politics could shift overnight, but contracts, they argued, were contracts. By the time Europe stood on the brink of war in 1939, the uncomfortable truth was clear. The same financial networks that had helped Germany recover from Versailles had also laid the groundwork for its reinforcement. The Allies would soon portray the conflict as a moral struggle between freedom and tyranny. Yet in boardrooms from New York to London, the language was simpler. Business was business, and Germany had been very good business. When Hitler's armies swept across Europe, they didn't just seize territory, they seized treasuries. Gold reserves from Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and later France and Belgium were stripped from central banks and shipped west, but one place where it could be melted, restamped, and moved quietly into circulation: Switzerland. Switzerland's neutrality made it a perfect financial safe haven. Officially, the Swiss stood apart from the conflict. In practice, their banks, led by UBS and Credit Suisse, became the vaults of Nazi gold. Trains rumbled through the Alps carrying bullion. Much of it was melted down, scrubbed of its original markings, and sold on international markets. From there, Germany could buy the foreign currency and raw materials it needed to keep its war machine alive. The Bank for International Settlements, BIS in Basel, added another layer of legitimacy. Created after World War I to manage reparations, it became a clearinghouse where Nazi Germany, Britain, the US and neutrals all sat at the same table. In 1939, just months after Germany invaded Czechoslovakia, the BIS quietly transferred gold held in London into German accounts, a move that handed Hitler millions while the world protested in vain. And Switzerland was not the only neutral profiting. Sweden supplied Germany with high-grade iron ore, critical for tanks, artillery and submarines. Without Swedish ore, Nazi production lines would have ground to a halt. Neutrality became less about staying out of the war and more about staying profitable within it. For Switzerland, the war years were a financial boom. Vaults filled with looted wealth, balance sheets swelled, and when the war ended, secrecy laws shielded much of what had passed through Zurich and Geneva. Survivors who lost everything often discovered their stolen assets locked behind the impenetrable walls of Swiss banking confidentiality. The Reich may have relied on weapons to conquer Europe, but it relied on Switzerland to monetize the spoils. Neutral on paper, profitable in practice, the Swiss became bankers to the war itself. War divides nations, but in the world of business, lines were far blurrier. For multinational corporations, profit often came before principle. Take Standard Oil of New Jersey. Before and during the war, it supplied Germany with crucial fuel additives like tetraethyl lead, a chemical that made aviation fuel more powerful. Without it, the Luftwaffe's air dominance in the early years would have been far weaker. Even after the US entered the war, questions persisted about whether subsidiaries and intermediaries kept those supplies flowing indirectly, or ITT, the American telecommunications giant. Through its European branches, ITT provided communications technology that linked German forces across the continent. The same systems that connected Nazi units on the battlefield had been designed in boardrooms thousands of miles away. German corporations also found ways to keep business alive despite sanctions. Through subsidiaries in South America and neutral countries, companies like IG Farben continued trading, accessing technology, and securing raw materials. On paper, restrictions were tight. In reality, profits found their way through back doors. At the center of this shadow economy was the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, in Basel. Officially created to manage post-World War I reparations, by the 1940s it was quietly facilitating financial transactions for both Allies and Axis alike. Nazi representatives sat at the same table as Americans and Britons, using the bank's neutrality to legitimize their funds. One notorious case came after Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. Gold reserves held in London on behalf of the Czech National Bank were transferred via the BIS into German accounts. The transaction was legal on paper, but in practice it handed Hitler millions stolen from a conquered nation, cloaked in international respectability. These examples reveal an uncomfortable truth. While armies clashed, corporations and financial institutions often played both sides. For them, war wasn't about ideology. It was about contracts, balance sheets, and markets that never closed. World War II was not only fought in trenches and skies, it was also fought in offices, vaults, and boardrooms, where the currency was profit and neutrality was just another business model. By 1940, Britain was out of money. The world's greatest empire, with colonies on every continent, was bankrupt just a year into the war. Every shipload of food, every tank, every gallon of oil had to be bought in dollars, and Britain's gold reserves were vanishing. The empire that had financed global wars for centuries now faced collapse, not from German bombs, but from empty vaults. The lifeline came from across the Atlantic. In 1941, the United States passed the Lend-Lease Act, providing weapons, fuel, and supplies to Britain and later the Soviet Union. By the end of the war, the value of this aid exceeded $50 billion, which is hundreds of billions in today's terms. To many, it looked like generosity, but in reality, it was credit. Britain was trading not cash, but dependence. Wall Street handled the flow. Banks like JP Morgan and Chase structured loans, sold bonds, and managed the vast currents of capital sustaining the Allied war machine. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh churned out tanks and bombers, paid for not with British pounds, but with American credit. And with every deal, the balance of power shifted. For centuries, the City of London had been the financial capital of the world. And with every deal, the balance of power shifted. For centuries, the City of London had been the financial capital of the world. Sterling was the currency of empire. But World War II exposed its weakness. Britain, once the great creditor, became the world's largest debtor. The United States emerged as the new financial superpower. The dollar, backed by America's unmatched industrial might, began replacing sterling as the global reserve. By 1945, Britain had won militarily but lost financially. Its empire survived the battlefield but collapsed under the weight of debt. World War II was the moment the crown of global finance slipped quietly off London's head and landed firmly on Wall Street. When the war ended in 1945, Europe was rubble. Cities flattened, factories reduced to shells, railways twisted and broken. For millions, survival meant breadlines and black markets. But where most saw devastation, financiers saw the next opportunity. In 1947, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, a massive program of aid to rebuild Europe. On paper, it was about stability, prosperity, and preventing communism. In practice, it was also one of the largest financial operations in history. Over $13 billion flowed across the Atlantic, the equivalent of more than $150 billion today. But the money didn't simply land in European treasuries. It moved through US banks, contractors, and corporations. Every shipment of machinery, every loan for infrastructure, every crate of food was an American export. The aid not only rebuilt Europe, it supercharged American industry and cemented Wall Street's global dominance. Germany, once reduced to ruins, became a central focus. Its factories had fueled the Reich. Now, they would fuel recovery. US investment helped restart production, often through partnerships with the same corporations that had been entangled with Germany before and during the war. Chemical giant IG Farben, infamous for producing Zyklon B, was broken apart, but its pieces re-emerged as modern titans. BASF, Bayer, Hoechst. American capital and markets welcomed them back into the fold. Ford and General Motors, whose German subsidiaries had produced vehicles for the Wehrmacht, resumed business in the new West Germany. For banks, Reconstruction was as profitable as destruction. Loans financed rebuilding. Credits underwrote new trade. Institutions like the Bank for International Settlements, tarnished by its wartime role. role, continued seamlessly, now mediating recovery instead of looted gold. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe, yes, but it also ensured that rebuilding was channeled through American finance and industry. The US not only emerged as the world's arsenal during the war, it became its banker. Afterward, war had ended, but profit had not. For the financiers who had funded destruction and then funded recovery, World War II proved a lesson as old as history. Chaos is costly, but rebuilding can be even more lucrative. World War II is remembered as the ultimate clash of nations, democracy versus fascism, freedom versus tyranny. The images endure: the Normandy landings, the fall of Berlin, the liberation of camps. It was undeniably a military victory bought with sacrifice. But behind the smoke and glory was another story, one not told in monuments or textbooks. It was a financial triumph. Banks, corporations, and neutral states profited in ways soldiers never could. They loaned money to regimes on both sides. They laundered looted gold. They supplied fuel, machinery, and technology, sometimes to the very armies their own nations would later fight. And if you find this side of history revealing, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment. It helps more people discover these untold stories, and it allows us to keep creating documentaries like this one, because when the war ended, they profited again from the rebuilding, selling steel, credit, and machinery to resurrect the economies they had once helped sustain in war. The same financial networks that thrived in chaos thrived again in peace. For them, ideology mattered less than stability. Victory mattered less than continuity. What truly mattered was that the flow of money never stopped, and that is the uncomfortable truth. World War II may have been fought with bombs and rifles, but it was financed with loans and contracts. Soldiers died, nations crumbled, but balance sheets grew. The lesson is as stark today as it was then. War ends. Profit doesn't. The financiers of World War II remind us sometimes the battlefield isn't land and sky, sometimes it's ledgers, vaults, and boardrooms, where victory is measured not in lives, but in profits tallied.